you are on assignment.
We'll keep increasing sanctions.
I like people coming here legally.
Now, a behind-the-scenes look. Hello and welcome to On Assignment. I'm Alex Villarreal.
And I'm Imran Siddiqui. Coming up, as fighting rages in Syria, we'll take a closer look at the role of Kurds in the north.
Online media play a big role in the U.S. presidential campaigns.
A little-known minority in Burma fights against persecution.
And gays in Iran struggle even to be recognized in their country.
We'll get the inside scoop on these stories and more as we take you on assignment.
Syrian government attacks on small towns in the north have forced thousands of refugees to the border with Turkey, where they have waited under the protection of the Free Syrian Army.
Meanwhile, Kurds have been in control of some northern villages and are remaining neutral in the civil war, hoping the conflict may ultimately result in a homeland of their own. On Assignment's Todd Grosshans caught up with VOA correspondent Scott Bob.
Scott, give us a general overview of the situation in Syria as of now.
Most of the attention is focused on the two major cities, Damascus and Aleppo. And I was in the northern part near Aleppo. And what we're not seeing as much of is there's a lot of aerial bombardment, artillery shelling, and even helicopter gunship attacks on small towns. The Syrian army a few weeks ago began to withdraw its troops, and rebels took nominal control over a number of cities in the north and a few in other parts of the country. This in order to allow the government to focus on the big cities. But what it's doing is it sends out MiG warplanes or helicopter gunships to bomb these towns in order to sort of send a message that it still has some control. It can still inflict a heavy amount of damage. And what this is doing is this is causing a tremendous toll on the civilian population because these bombs are not accurate, and you're getting now sometimes an average of 200 lives being lost, many of them, or most of them, civilian lives a day.
So you touched on it a little bit, but let's get more detail as to just how bad it is in these smaller cities and towns in the north after this kind of horrendous bombing.
The residents of Azaz clean up and mourn after Wednesday's deadly bombing by Syrian government warplanes. Azaz had been peaceful in recent months, although forces of the rebel Free Syrian Army have had to resist several government attacks this year. A grieving Mahmoud Ghrieri lost a dozen relatives in this attack near the central market, including his uncle's entire family.
There are other towns I visited where almost the entire population has fled. I'm thinking in particular of Tal Rifa, which is about 20 kilometers from the border with Turkey, where of the 40,000 residents, only 2,000 remain, and they're primarily young men who stayed on to guard against looting.
So where did all those people go?
Some had been displaced within Syria, but many have gone to the border. And there are hundreds that are actually at the border with Turkey and waiting for room. Turkey has run out of space, and so until they can build new camps or add to the camps already existing, they're not allowing them in. And this is causing severe suffering among those people while they wait for a place to go to.
They're obviously waiting on the Syrian side of the border then to get into Turkey?
That's correct. When Turkey has space, they let them cross. They're relatively safe. It's just the conditions are very squalid, particularly sanitation and running water. It's still very hot in that part of the country, and so it's a considerable high degree of suffering, and of course there is the risk of these communicable diseases outbreaking.
I don't want to beat this to death, but if they're still on the Syrian side of the border, who's looking after them? Who's setting up any kind of an infrastructure to take care of these people?
It's mostly the Free Syrian Army and their own network of family and friends, because the humanitarian efforts have not been very great, the international, I should say, humanitarian efforts. There are some Syrian groups working and trying to help them, but it's because the influx is increased so much, they are overwhelmed.
So you visited a city by the name of Afrin in the northern area of the country.
A hot afternoon in the Kurdish city of Afrin. When Syrian government forces withdrew recently, Afrin came under the control of the Kurds' Democratic Union Party, known as the PYD. It has its own checkpoints here and flies its own flag. Hundreds have gathered in a nearby village to bury a local son. He died fighting in the 28-year-old struggle by separatist Kurds in Turkey against the Turkish government. Most Syrian Kurds support this struggle, and privately, many say they aspire to the same goal, a Kurdish homeland in their region. Kurds make up 10% of Syria's population, but have never been officially recognized by the government of the Syrian Arab Republic.
There are a number of communities in the north that are predominantly inhabited by Kurds. Several weeks ago, the Syrian government withdrew its forces from these Kurdish dominated towns, and the Kurdish militias took over security for them. They remain, at least publicly, neutral in the conflict. They say they are not with the rebels or the government because neither side has basically recognized their aspirations for autonomy for the Kurdish people.
Altogether, the Kurds number about 30 million, spread across parts of Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. Their aspirations trouble the central governments of those countries. Syria's Kurds, surrounded by conflict, are in a delicate position. But the war has given them a new freedom that they vow never to surrender.
All right, again, that was VOA correspondent Scott Bobb reporting for us from northern Syria.
Coming up, U.S. politics and the internet. They are together now more than ever. You're watching On Assignment.
In the United States, both the Republican and Democratic parties have wrapped up their presidential nominating conventions. Candidates Mitt Romney and President Barack Obama will now turn their attention to campaigning, which they will be doing a lot of between now and November 6th.
The conventions in Florida and North Carolina were filled with all the traditional political trappings. But this year, the role of social media was bigger than ever. On Assignment's Doug Bernard joins us for more from Charlotte. Doug, if you look back 10 years ago, do you think people would have thought about social media or digital media taking over the conventions like it has this year?
Well, it's interesting, Imran. You know, the Republican and Democratic conventions this year couldn't be more different. Different ideologies, different tone, different speakers. Even here in Charlotte, there are 3 times as many delegates as there were in Tampa, all crammed into a smaller convention hall. But there's one thing that all the parties agree on, and that's that conventions are moving online. At these conventions, it's all about the buzz. It's all about the digits. The 2012 conventions are all about the texting and the sharing and the Wi-Fi. And if you're not online, you might as well have stayed home. It's a long way from just 4 years ago.
A lot of folks said that was going to be a social convention. And 4 years later, I think we're kind of blowing that out of the water.
Both the Republicans and Democrats worked hard this year to play up their digital credentials. Everything was online. You could even add your signature to the Declaration of Independence. Virtually, that is. And social media were out in force as well. Facebook, Twitter, Google, and 100 other websites were posting up a storm. Still, it was a curious mix of old and new, with equal parts laptops and TV cameras. That's because these days, according to BuzzFeed's Chris Geidner, all news coverage is social.
The way that news sites of all forms are starting to see their traffic patterns change is towards more sharing, more social media, and the operations that fail to address that change are going to be left behind.
So with all this sharing and liking and online activity, do old-fashioned balloons and buttons conventions still have a future? Google's Daniel Seberg thinks so, although he cautions there's no telling what the next conventions in 2016 will look like.
You know, even 2 or 4 years ago, mobile wasn't as much of a big deal as it is today, and people are able to participate in so many different ways with their smartphone or their tablet. 2 or 4 years from now, as the political cycles continue, it's just exciting to see what could happen.
7, 8. Now, so far in 2012, TV viewership of the conventions is off by as much as 20%. That while the parties are reporting that web traffic is at an all-time high. Now, here's the dirty little secret about conventions, which really isn't so secret. They may be big and messy and very expensive, but they're still the most effective political advertising that the parties have yet found. And so long as that is true, the conventions are going to continue.
Now, Doug, this year we saw both conventions actually were shorter than usual. Is this a trend that we are going to see continue?
Right, Alex. You remember the Republican convention was shortened by Hurricane Isaac. Democrats had just pre-shortened it. And I think this year we've seen the death of the 4-day convention. The real question now is whether they may go to 2 days, 1 day, whether they may go to multiple cities. Whatever happens, I think the trend that they're going to be moving more and more online is irreversible.
Well, thank you, Doug. That's Doug Bernard reporting from Charlotte, North Carolina. And Doug has been instrumental in covering both national conventions this year.
We're going to take a break now. When we come back, sectarian tensions are simmering in Western Burma, where a little-known minority faces persecution. You're watching On Assignment. Sectarian tensions are simmering in Western Burma after violence between Buddhist Rakhine and Muslim Rohingya left scores of people dead and thousands homeless.
The Rohingya, one of the world's most persecuted minorities, have few rights in Burma, but Burma's president insists discrimination is not to blame for the tension. On Assignment's Rebecca Ward got the story from VOA's Daniel Scharf.
Thousands of ethnic Rohingya Muslims and ethnic Rakhine Buddhists live separately as refugees after communal violence in Burma's western Rakhine state. Revenge attacks spiraled from May after a group of Rakhine killed a busload of Rohingya over an alleged rape. Rohingya mobs set fire to villages, forcing people to flee to monasteries with nothing but the clothes they were wearing, says Rakhine Saw.
People were carrying sticks and knives. I've never seen anything like this before.
The Rohingya tell strikingly similar stories of ethnic Rakhine burning their homes, but some make the more serious allegation that they were also attacked by police.
The police had guns, and they threw petrol onto the mosque.
Despite similar evidence from rights groups, authorities dismiss accusations that security forces took sides and say to the contrary, they restored peace.
The UN Special Envoy to Burma, Quintana, was just in the country, and he was saying that from what he could see and what he could tell, there were certainly a lot of concerns about what had taken place in Rakhine State between the Rakhine Buddhists and the Muslim Rohingya. A lot of violence took place. We had 88 people officially were killed during the violence this summer. Some people believe that number may actually be low, though. And his recommendation was that there needs to be an independent investigation. There needs to be some real accountability.
For an independent and credible investigation into these allegations of human rights violations as a matter of urgency.
Now, the Rohingya, they are not counted as citizens in Burma, so I'm wondering how long have they been there? And they're referred to in some cases as coming from Bangladesh. So where do they come from? How long have they been in Burma?
Yeah, that's right. The Rohingya are truly stateless people. They're not recognized as citizens inside Burma. They're not recognized as citizens inside Bangladesh. The Rohingya have been inside Burma for hundreds of years as a people. There are about 800,000 Rohingya estimated to be inside Burma right now. And for hundreds of years, there's been at least some sort of a record of Rohingya being inside Burma. But what happened was in 1982, when the country passed a citizenship law, the Rohingya were not included in that law as being recognized as an ethnic minority of the country. So that effectively gave the legal kicking out, as it were, of the Rohingya from any possible legal recognition inside the country. And certainly the majority of people inside Burma look at the Rohingya as being migrants. They don't look at them as being citizens of the country or even an ethnicity of the country that should be recognized.
Well, what do you think is going to happen? Will Burma eventually allow the UN to launch an investigation into the sectarian violence?
Well, the authorities in Burma, the government, President Thein Sein made it quite clear when he spoke to our Burmese service during an exclusive interview. They do not recognize the Rohingya as citizens. They will not recognize the Rohingya as citizens. This is going to be an internal matter that they are going to resolve on their own.
Daniel, Do you think that after Burma opening up to journalists and the media more recently, that this will cause them to clamp down again?
Well, there are always concerns that the government may take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Rakhine State, of course, was put under a state of emergency after the violence broke out. So far, we aren't seeing any real strong evidence that they are going to turn around and go back to the strong controls that we saw under the military government. But that's something that everyone is watching very closely and very carefully to see if there will be any sort of a turnaround as a result of some of these tensions that have been going on.
The U.S. presidential campaign has brought the rights of gays again into focus in America. But in Iran, President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad says gays do not even exist in his country.
Some homosexuals are starting to speak out about what it means to be gay in Iran, and Hamideh Aramideh of VOA's Persian News Network has been following their plight for a long time. Here is what she told me when we spoke.
The start of a normal day for Arash and Nima. But for them, just walking out the door is a reminder they're no longer at home in Iran.
The LGBT community is part of a vulnerable class of the Iranian society.
Arash left Iran for Turkey 9 months ago. He now works as a filmmaker and shot this video to help document his new life.
Hamideh, how dangerous is it to be gay in Iran?
It's really dangerous, Alex. Any type of relationship beyond the heterosexual marriage is forbidden. Transsexual is illegal, it's not illegal. If person just put herself through the sex change operation. Homosexuality is crime, absolutely crime and forbidden, and then they can put you in execution.
How common is this?
It's, the Iran just says that we never ever execute person because he or she is a homosexual. But we just hang people, we kill people, execute them if they are rapists or murderer. But that's not true,
Right, because President Ahmadinejad, he denies even that there are gay people in the country, right?
Yes, because he doesn't want to answer the further questions. When he accepts the further question, the next step is why you just treat them like this. They are human, but he just wants to stop all the questions.
In Iran, we don't have homosexuals like in your country. In Iran, we do not have this phenomenon. I don't know who has told you that we have it.
Fareed, another Iranian exile living in Turkey, said on YouTube the feeling of oppression permeates Iran's everyday life.
When you walk down the street, you feel you're being assaulted from all sides. We're being looked at like a third gender.
What motivated you to cover this issue?
Okay, that's a long story, but we have to go back to my teenager's time. And then I had a friend, close friend. His name was Ali, and he born and raised in one of the most holy cities in Iran, Qom. Probably you heard about that.
Yes, of course.
And he was gay, and that was very, very difficult for him to say openly that I'm a gay. He was through so many horrible situations and problems with his family, with society, and then he came to Tehran, to the biggest city with the worst problems. So I always remember him.
آرش رات همکارم از چند ایرانی و غیر ایرانی ساکن سان فرانسیسکو در مورد نظرشون نسبت به همجنسگرایان پرسیده.
Yeah, and what was the response? I imagine it's rare to have coverage of homosexuality on media that airs in Iran.
Yes.
So what was the response?
The response of government has been always the same. They attacked me. But about the people, people are different, ideas are different. But thank God, because there are so many young, the population is young in Iran, and it's really, really acceptable for most of the young people in Iran,
So you did get some responses welcoming the fact that you covered this?
Yes, mostly, and shocking.
Like what?
Like I brought one of these shocking
responses.
and interesting response.
Yes.
From a man.
Mm-hmm.
He said, Hamide, I was watching a program about homosexuality when my wife said, change the channel. What the hell are they talking about? What are you watching? But she didn't know how eagerly I watched your show about like-minded people like myself.
Wow.
I, like many others in Iran, had to hide my homosexual identity and repress my feelings. I can never reveal my secret to her and to my children. On behalf of myself and many others who I know, I thank you for informative program.
Wow. That must have had a huge impact on you.
Impact, I just cried. I have been crying so many times with some message like this. I mean, that is really, really
very
touchable.
Powerful.
Yes,
yeah.
that is powerful.
Well, Hamida, very important work that
Thank
you're
you.
doing. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Our thanks again to Hamideh Ramideh, who is with VOA's Persian News television network.
From Superman to Batman, these Hollywood heroes started on the pages of comic books. Comic books may have declined, but comics themselves are undergoing a technological revolution. Exactly how? Elizabeth Lee explains.
For the last 30 years, Golden Apple Comics in Los Angeles has been selling comic books to adults and children like Evan Cray.
I just like holding the pages and reading it.
The look of these pages hasn't changed much, but owner Ryan Leibowitz says something new is happening.
In the last year or so, we've seen a major transition into digital comic books.
The idea of reading a comic book online is catching on. Comixology has over 25,000 comic books in its online store, says Chip Mosier. It's vice president of marketing, public relations, and business development.
For the last 6 to 9 months, we've ranked as the top grossing iPad app in the entire iTunes App Store.
Last year, the company had $17 million in sales. This year, it expects sales to reach $17 million. For about the same price as a paper comic book, readers get a digital version.
Mark Wade created the digital comic site Thrillbent. He says his comics fit the digital screen.
Most screens, whether they're television screens, your laptop screen, or your iPad screen, are that landscape format. They're wider than they are tall. So first off, stop producing digital comics that don't fit that format.
Creators of digital comics say their audience is looking for something other than violence, which has been fueled by video games and movies, says Ryan Leibowitz.
I mean, you can see the covers of these comic books. These don't look like happy people. They all have guns. They're all out to hurt each other.
Leibowitz now offers digital comics on his store's website. He says customers are buying both traditional comics and the new versions.
I'll say there are some comics, like my favorites, that I actually too prefer having a hard copy. But for a lot of them, it's just really convenient and really nice to be able to get them. I can read them on an iPad, and it's really a convenient format.
Many in the industry say they hope digital comics will attract new readers who will boost business in both the virtual and real worlds. Elizabeth Lee for VOA News, Los Angeles.
And that's our show for this week. We'll be back next week with a look at a Bollywood singer who has more than 1 billion followers around the world and still a lot of love in India and Pakistan decades after his death.
We'll also take a look at the media war being played out in Syria through the eyes of 2 brothers aiding the rebels.
For more on today's show, check out voanews.com where you can see all of our past episodes.
We're on Facebook and YouTube as well. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you next week.
See you next time.